Hello, dear listener, and welcome to another episode. Today, I am here with Sebastian Nothwell.
Hello.
And we will be discussing his book, Mr. Warren's Profession, in celebration of his latest Kickstarter. Hi, Sebastian.
Hello, Tess. Delighted to be here.
Actually, I've been looking forward to this all day, so even though the pleasantries are very much like, oh no, the pleasure is all mine to be here in the podcasting studio with you today, I really am quite thrilled. So, to just get this ball rolling, can you tell us a little bit about what your book, Mr. Warren's Profession, is about?
I can.
Please do.
Mr. Warren's Profession is a gay Victorian cross-class romance between an aristocrat who wins a textile mill in a card game and the clerk who happens to work at that mill, worked his way up from nothing, and now has an aristocrat falling head over heels for him. Whatever will they do?
Oh, it's the dream. Can you actually rewrite the book as a how-to guide? For all of us working class people who want a aristocrat to fall in love with us. Thank you.
Not gonna lie, I wrote it while working boutique retail on food stamps, so there is a great deal of wish fulfillment in the novel itself.
What inspired you to write this book?
So, once upon a time in 2013, I got a text out of the blue from my sister that said, "Let's write romance novels and become rich and famous." And I said, alright, I've got nothing else on, sure. So I made a New Year's resolution to open the same text document every day and just add something to it. It could be a word, it could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, but it had to be something, and it had to be every day. And at the end of the month, I had 10,000 words. So I went back to my sister and I was like, I have 10,000 words, would you like to read them? And she said, actually, I only read Finnish books. And I said, okay, I guess I'm finishing this now. So 4 years later, I finished writing it, published it, sent her the ebook and said, hey, would you like to read it now that it's finished? And she said, actually, I only read print books. And I was like, okay. So I set up all the paperback formatting, got it printed, handed her a physical book and said, all right, let me know what you think. And about a month later, I checked in to see what she thought, and she said, yeah, I couldn't really get into it. So
the ending gets me every single time. Like, I know it's coming, and then you say it, and I'm still like, God, brutal.
But yeah, I owe her my entire writing career because Mr. Warren's Profession was the first book I ever did, and if it wasn't for her not reading unfinished books, I probably never would have finished it.
It's kind of funny how that stuff works out sometimes, and I'm sure that, myself included, there are many people out there who are very thankful that she, girl boss, girl manipulated you into finishing your debut novel.
Truly.
So you've written a lot of books by this point, like 7, right?
7, yes. Precisely, yes.
I'm a Nothwell girly, okay? I know my facts. I did not need you to explain the entire plot of this book to me yesterday in a voice call. That actually didn't happen. So you've written 7 books by now. What sets this book apart specifically from the others that you've written?
It's the first one, so I do have kind of a conflicted relationship because I can see 7 books later things I would have done differently, but that said, I would say it's probably the most straightforwardly historical of all my books. It's very much rooted in real-world history of England in the 1890s, with a lot of focus on the workers' rights movements of the time, how textile mills work, letter writing etiquette, dinner party etiquette, steam boilers, and how to make them not explode. Just a lot of digging into historical detail, which is part of why it took 4 years.
That makes complete sense. So, on that note, I know that research is one of your favorite parts of your process, and obviously it was deeply embedded with the process with this book. So what sorts of research did you conduct? Like, what was your process like in terms of, like, digging into the research and the historical facts of it all?
It was an awful lot of reading.
I bet.
I did get to visit the Boot Mills Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts for some first-hand, up-close and personal 19th century mill research.
That's cool.
I think the veracity of those details kind of comes through in the final product. It would not be nearly as vivid of a novel if it were not for that museum. But aside from that, it's a lot of reading, and this was back before Google sucked, and when you could actually find relevant things on the internet. And back when the magazine The Engineer had its full archives up for free to peruse in PDF format, full scans of everything they'd ever published going back to the early 1800s. So, researching the Victorian engineering was an absolute delight, And they have since taken down that archive because they hate me personally and they want me to suffer.
I can agree with you on that because as someone who has been working in the library for several years now, I've been talking with my librarian lately about access to materials and like scanned newspapers and stuff, and it's just everything is like really hard to access. Like even if you have a library card, a lot of that is really behind a paywall or behind a lot of steps to get to it. So
Yep.
I'm glad that you were able to do all that research before we made literally everything super complicated.
Very much so, yes.
This just dawned on me. This was the book that you kind of rewrote for the Solar Fantasy story on your Patreon, right?
This is, yes.
Yeah.
I rewrote the whole dang thing in a Solar Fantasy setting on my Patreon.
I just feel like I remember you saying that when you had been conducting the research, you got interested in the part of history where we were thinking that we were going to be using sun to power everything in the way that we ended up using coal. Am I remembering that right?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, please correct me.
They weren't considering using sun in Victorian England because the weather is not necessarily conducive to solar power over there.
Okay, facts.
But they were looking very hard at wind and they were looking very hard at water because those they have in abundance. So, in the 1860s through 1880s, William Armstrong, Victorian engineer, built the house called Cragside in Northumberland, and it was the first house to be lit by hydroelectric power in the 1880s.
Wow.
And sometimes I think about that and how we had enough hydroelectric power to light a mansion in the 1880s, and how we all collectively turned our backs on that and said, well, surely we'll never run out of coal. And
oh boy.
And so I wrote the Solar Fantasy Project as an idea of like, what if the Victorians had kept on with the renewable energy resources instead of throwing up their hands and being like, gasoline seems fine.
Thank you, I feel enlightened. So there are a lot of lovable characters in Mr. Warren's profession. Which one would you say you relate to the most?
I feel like this is probably obvious from reading the text, but it's Aubrey Warren.
Yeah.
On account of the whole working boutique retail on food stamps and thinking a lot about, man, sure do wish I had a rich kid to sweep me off my feet over here.
Yeah. He's very ambitious in the way that you are, so I can see it. I can agree with that.
I would say he's significantly more ambitious than I am because I, for one, haven't jump-started an engineering career out of nothing. I flunked every math class that wasn't accounting, so that was not going to happen for me.
And yet you write all day, every day, so...
I'm trying.
I'm just saying. What was the hardest thing to write in this book? Or what was the hardest part about the process? Whichever is more relevant to you.
The hardest scene in the book to write was, spoiler alert, the boiler explosion, just because there was a lot of math and science I had to get right, otherwise the scene wouldn't work, and a lot of things had to be very precisely in the proper place at the proper time in order for it all to go off as it does. And it was the first time I'd ever completed a project on this scale whatsoever, the first novel I'd ever actually finished, so like...
Yeah, jeez.
It was a lot of pressure on myself, but having done it, I now know that I am capable of doing it, so it made every other project considerably less intimidating.
I didn't ever think about, like you said, the boiler exploded, and I went, hell yeah, it did. Like... It wouldn't have made any difference to me. I wouldn't have noticed if something had been inaccurate. But it's kind of cool to know that all that care and thought went into it to make it work.
I should clarify, it's accurate to my standards as someone who, I cannot stress enough, is not an engineer. So I do shudder to think what an actual engineer would think to read it, but...
That's not my business, that's not your business. We don't gotta bring that book to engineers and be like, is this correct? That's not for us to know.
The other part that I struggled with was just the constant ADHD focus struggle that I think a shocking number of creatives can relate to.
100% of the people in this call, I would say, actually.
100%.
100%.
We've run the numbers.
How did you conquer your ADHD and the sort of executive dysfunction of it all?
So a lot of it involved going to write in public places like cafes and libraries where I was too socially awkward to ask for the Wi-Fi password, which effectively locked me out of any internet browsing much more effectively than like any digital tool.
That's funny. I have the same strategy of leaving the house and going somewhere else, but I do know the Wi-Fi password, and unfortunately that has led to some pretty wild distractions.
I bet, yeah. It has become a less workable strategy in the pandemic age we are in now. I don't really feel comfortable going out to crowded public spaces and staying there for hours at a time anymore. So it's a lot more writing in my house, and as a result, I've become much slower as a writer.
That's understandable, though. I mean, everything happens in its own time. And your writing and your books and your projects that you work on all kind of happen when they're supposed to. Even with sisters who manipulate us into getting them finished, and pandemics and all the other strange things that impact the way that we create. I think it's all in due time.
I don't think she was manipulating me. I think she's just very picky.
That's fair. I should maybe clarify and say if someone did the same exact thing to me, they would be manipulating me.
Wow.
I think it would be like a reverse psychology sort of situation, but with tender love and care as their intentions. Anyways.
As opposed to my sister, whose attitude is just, make something good, why don't you? Have you tried making it good?
Well, I mean, there are some times where I, want to write a story that I want to write solely because I read a bad version of it. And I go, I can do that better.
I mean, truly.
Anyway, what's something that you hope readers can take away from your book? Marry rich.
No.
Stay away from boilers.
I would hope the moral of the story is get involved in collective action efforts amongst your local workforce. But yeah, that moral is kind of undercut with the part where he does in fact marry rich. So I don't know. What is the takeaway, Tess? You tell me.
I think it's both.
I would hope that readers get a sense of comfort from the book and that they either feel seen or learn something about lives that aren't their own and become more empathetic as a result.
That's gorgeous. I think as an empathetic person who read the book, I would say that was successful.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
I don't have to write anymore.
You must. Okay. No. You must still write. Because when we were talking, you hinted that you were planning a sequel. So tell me more about that, if you can share anything. It's just you and me in the room.
Spoilers for the next 30 seconds to 5 minutes for the ending of Mr. Warren's Profession. So at the end of Mr. Warren's Profession, Lindsay is engaged to Emmeline.
The drama.
He continues to be engaged to Emmeline through the sequel, Throw His Heart Over. And in the short story sequel to that, available exclusively through my newsletter for free. Enjoy.
I forgot there was a sequel. I read the sequel. You had these questions in advance and you didn't think to tell me that it was the third book and not the sequel. I forgot the horse one.
I mean, clearly it didn't make much of an impression, so maybe I should revisit.
No, okay. I have to give the listeners the same disclaimer that I gave you yesterday, which was that I gobbled these books up in a stupor in the middle of the night when I was taking care of my frail elderly grandmother. So, forgive me if my long-term memory was not functioning at high capacity.
I'm sorry.
Okay, anyway. So he's hinting at a third book. Okay, everyone? I stand corrected.
I'm just saying, for everything that's passed, Lindsay has remained engaged to Emmeline, and they have not yet married.
And so in the third book, we will see whether or not they actually do, maybe?
Perhaps.
Oh, okay.
Perchance.
Perchance. I can't speak French, actually.
Don't worry, it's not a can I.
Oh my goodness, okay. So, the reason we are talking all about Mr. Warren's Profession, aside from the fact that it is a lovely story for all the reasons we've been discussing, we are bringing it up because it is currently on Kickstarter to... I'm not going to spoil it. Sebastian, tell us about the Kickstarter. It's all you!
Spoilers for the Kickstarter, Kimber? Yeah, we're currently crowdfunding the audiobook through Kickstarter.
Wow!
I previously crowdfunded the audiobook for Oak King, Holly King, and I'm delighted to be working again with Gary Furlong to narrate. So yeah, God willing and the creek don't rise, there will be a Mr. Warren's Profession audiobook.
What sorts of things can readers expect to receive in the different tiers of the Kickstarter?
Tier 1, you get Mr. Warren's Profession ebook itself at a discount. Tier 2, you get Mr. Warren's Profession and the sequel, Throw Its Heart Over, at a discount. Tier 3, you get all 7 of my ebooks available for 10 entire human dollars.
Wow.
And then for a mere $10 more, you can get all of my ebooks plus the Mr. Warren's Profession audiobook for $20.
That's a steal. Okay.
And we also have signed paperbacks and annotated paperbacks, which is me writing in a bunch of historical research and characterization footnotes in the margins.
Also, I have to say, if you didn't support Sebastian's first Kickstarter, then you don't know that he has the most beautiful signature I ever saw autographed into a book.
That is very sweet of you to say.
Well, when all the books got sent out, I heard it like 4 or 5 different people say it, and then I got mine and I was like, damn, they weren't kidding. This is gorgeous.
Thank you.
So you too can have a beautiful autographed copy of Mr. Moore's Profession, which I actually don't own a paperback of. So I would like to own a signed paperback. Please, everyone, fund the Kickstarter. Thank you.
And we also have some stretch goals, which will allow us to offer signed and annotated paperbacks of Throw His Heart Over. And if we meet our final stretch goal, record the sequel audiobook, Throw His Heart Over, alongside the original and allow them to release back to back.
Oh, I just think that would be so fun. Any final words to take us away, Sebastian?
Do you like Hurt Comfort?
Do I like Hurt Comfort?
You, the listener, anyone passing by my window at this moment?
I would go out on a limb and say that possibly 99.999% of the population enjoys Hurt Comfort.
That is a bold claim, and I would like to see the statistics you have to back it up. But in the meantime, if you enjoy Hurt Comfort, this is worth taking a look at.
I would be inclined to agree. Tune in next time on Right Here, Right Queer, the podcast where we're writing and we're queer.
We truly are.
We are!
Thank you so much for having me on, Tess.
Anytime.
Excited to podcast with you again soon.
You too.